Please be seated. Again, not Scott Jenkins, and also not good at impressions, so I'm not going to try to do a Scott Jenkins impression. I was listening to the radio earlier this week, and they have interviewed 3 different religious leaders from the Abrahamic traditions, so Muslim, Jewish, and Christian, talking about leading their congregations through the difficulties of 2025 and how to move into 2026 with hope. And I thought, was 2025 really that bad? Don't answer me, okay? But I mean, we're long past COVID, and all the wars that have started are already started, and the money was already bad, the economy, right? No? Okay, you're right. It wasn't hard. It wasn't easy. And I realized, listening to those leaders, that it is particularly hard, I think, in this time to live as a person of faith, whatever your faith tradition might be. Because when Paul talks about all these spiritual blessings we're going to get, wisdom and enlightenment and hope, nobody cares about those things. When people are making their New Year's resolutions, nobody's making a resolution to be more enlightened. They're making resolutions to lose 25 pounds and earn $1 million in a week and make more friends and get a better job and all that kind of stuff. None of which is bad, of course, I guess, but we sort of are trying to exist in a different way. And so often the way that religion is used in the public realm is to be hurtful to people, right? And we know that's not what Jesus would want, and I don't think that's a big part of really any of the major world religions. But that's the perception that people who are not a part of the religious traditions often have of who we are. So we have to live in a different way while feeling alienated from people who claim our religion and behave in a way that we don't necessarily agree with, and then the people who don't know anything about our religion and are basing their understanding of who we are on how those people are behaving. It's not an easy life. But I guess the good news is we aren't homeless refugees in Egypt, right? Because that's where Jesus is today. I know we skipped over the even worse part of that. Remember how I always tell you to pay attention to the dashes, right? This is not a great news gospel. Because in those little lines that we don't talk about, Herod killed all the boys, everybody under the age of 2. Can you imagine how that tragedy affected that community? I mean, not just at that time, but every time that group of kids would have graduated from kindergarten or graduated from high school, they were reminded of that tragedy. But you see why they skip it, because it doesn't really feel like a Christmas story, does it? But then again, neither does being told in the middle of the night that you have to leave the community you've known and travel to a land that your ancestors worked really hard to get out of, and where you have no necessary roots or have no idea what's going to happen or how you're going to live. That is not what we think of when we think about Christmas. I just finished reading a book called There Is No Place for Us by Brian Gladstone. He followed about half a dozen families in the Atlanta metro area who are part of a growing group of people that are called the working homeless, right? So these are people who work 1 or more full-time jobs and are still without housing. And he started following them in the fall of 2019. He had no idea how interesting things were going to get. But the sad part was that so many of the things that were put into place for COVID didn't actually help people who were, for example, living in extended stay hotels, which is on any given night what half of all hotel rooms being occupied are by people who live in those hotels. And they also didn't do much to address the larger issues that are making homelessness such a prevalent part of our society, such as there's not affordable places to live, right? We know this in the Denver metro area too. And so many of the programs that are supposed to be supporting people who are homeless are really difficult. So I learned that only about 1/3 of people in the Atlanta metro area who received housing vouchers were able to use them. Because in order to use them, you have to find a place that will take a voucher, will take as much as you are able to give it towards your rent, will meet all the requirements the state has gone through all the testing, whatever that has to be done. And you have only about 6 weeks to do that. And a lot of people, most people, can't meet those requirements. And it was just heartbreaking to me, you know? I know that we often think about people who are experiencing homelessness as also battling substance abuse or mental illness issues. And there was some of that in these people's stories, but for so many of them, they were just people like us, right? Like any of us who had one thing that went wrong that just spiraled out of control. So somebody's house burnt down, and so they left their house because, you know, there was no house there. And then they got an eviction notice, which they didn't get because they weren't living at their burned down house. And then they have an eviction notice on their record for the rest of the time they're trying to rent. Or people living in these long-term hotels, they have to pay exorbitant rates, and they don't have enough money to do that and save up for a first month's rent and deposit and all the things you have to do to get into an apartment. It was so devastating to read these people's stories, and I felt such a deep sense of hopelessness about what to do in the face of something as tragic as that. And I wondered, when Jesus and his family were there in Egypt, did they have a sense of hopelessness? Did they feel a sense of despair? They say that the memory that is most, that is your earliest memory is one of the most significant ones to you because you effectively have remembered it the most times, right? So it tells a little bit about your life, about what you value. And I think about what was Jesus's earliest memory, you know? I mean, we think about the beautiful nativity scene, and I mean, Jesus was God incarnate, so maybe he remembered that moment. I don't know. But most of us, our first memories come from later. So his first memory might well have been living in Egypt, right? Where his ancestors had tried to escape slavery and where he didn't have connections and he looks different and he spoke a different language. He probably had experiences of moving all around around a lot because they didn't have a solid home there. We don't really know. It's just one sentence in the gospel. But there's a solid chance that part of Jesus's earliest memories and earliest experiences were being a part of a marginalized group and struggling to survive. So maybe Christians are right where we're supposed to be. I'm not saying that feeling alienated from the society is the same as being homeless or being a refugee or any of the things that I know many of you have gone through in your lives or even in just the last year. But I do think that part of following Jesus means following people into the margins. It means feeling like we're not like everybody else. And the gifts of faith, the gifts that we talk about in the letter to the Ephesians or in Jeremiah's vision today, they aren't a guarantee that everything's going to go perfect, right? That you're going to be able to meet your resolution that you just set in the first 4 days of the year. That's not how it works. It's not a guarantee of smooth sailing. It's the skills and the gifts you need to weather the storm. Faith reminds us of the promise that God has for each and all of us, of the tremendous love God has for each and all of us, love that cannot really be expressed in words. And faith gives us the spiritual practices we need to draw closer to that God, whatever helps you in your relationship with the divine. And a community of people who are also struggling and unsure what to do sometimes, so that we can support each other as we try to live into the fullness of what God is calling us to do. The stories in this book weren't that great in the end. I wanted everything to resolve. In fact, halfway through reading it, I looked to the back to the author's notes because I was like, did he just watch all of this happen? And he did, because he's what do they call it? Anthropologist, right? So they don't interfere. So it was heartbreaking. And a lot of times I wished I could jump in and interfere myself from years in the future. But the truth is they also found a way, I noticed, to come together, right? To work together as a community, to support each other, and also to use the resources that were available to them to try to help them make their lives better. But the thing that struck me the most in reading this book was this one character, and I say character even though she is a real person because she was a character. She called herself La Pink, okay? And she had started a boutique for homeless people so that they could come and sort of shop for clothes rather than having to be given the castaways of whatever people didn't like, so that they could choose their own fashion and have their own style. And during COVID, she started collecting food and going to visit people in these extended stay apartments and doing everything she could to support them. And she said, I'm a follower of Christ, but I'm not a Christian, right? She's like, I don't go to church. I don't care about that kind of stuff, but I believe in what Jesus was about, and I want to live my life the way that he calls us to live. And I know that I'm a little late to the New Year's resolution game because you've probably been working on it very hard for 4 days, but I think that one of the gifts that our faith gives us is to ask harder questions and to look for deeper meaning. So what is worth remembering and treasuring from 2025, and what do you need to let go of? Who do you need to forgive? What do you need to stop trying to do because it's not working? And what do you need to keep trying to do even though you sometimes feel like it isn't going to work? What do we want this next year of our lives to be about? The gift of Christmas is a reminder to us that God is present to us, that God's love knows no limits, and that God goes to the very ends of the earth, to the marginalized people, to the hopeless, to the helpless, to show the depth of God's love. If that is true, how then are we to live?